Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So it's interesting. I was in Scandinavia, in Sweden, and I went to a bookshop in Stockholm and I picked up your book, and they call it one of their best sellers there. And it's called Cold People. And I've met a number of cold people. I didn't read the back of the book. Sometimes, like the front tells my cold people, what can he teach me? Um, Cold people. How many cold people do you know, Tom?
Well, you've gone straight to like the kind of, I wouldn't call it the subtext, but like one of the big ideas of the book, which what is it to be a warm person? What is it to be a cold person? I mean, but on the surface, the title is much more literal. But you're right, really, that's kind of in a way the secondary point, and your question is the primary thing. Like, what is at the heart of personalities, and what does it mean to have empathy and sympathy and compassion, and what does it mean to be much more clinical and cold. And I actually don't even necessarily suggest that there's a bad side to clinical and cold. There's a good quality to it too. It's kind of an important element of humanity. So you're exactly right with the question. It's kind of the subtext is almost bigger than the text there.
But it's interesting because it's that difference, right? I mean, I meet people along my journey. You do too. Like I call them like energy vampires. The moment you're around them, they just suck the life out of everything. They feel nothing. And you have to make a decision of who you have relationships with. So throughout your own life, toxic people, how do you get rid of them? And when do you know it's time to let go?
I think if I had like a definitive answer to that, I would package it and offer it to the world. But I'm struggling with it myself. It's like the big question. It's really hard. You look at Instagram or you look at Twitter, and everyone is like, well, one of the big rules is as soon as someone drains energy, as soon as they're toxic, you should move on. Question is, it's not that simple to spot. It's very subtle. And people, and mostly, not always, are a mix. So the people who are most, I mean, your word was toxic, but most, who could be most precarious to your state of, happiness or whatever it is,
Yeah.
are normally quite charming and normally generous in some way. They're not normally all one thing. And then they will slip in something that is very bad for you. And so it's trying to figure out the mix. And actually, that mix might be fine for other people. They might be like, I don't mind that that person does that. So even then, you're like, it's hard to be sure. And it's a constant question you're kind of grappling with. I also think, those things are about combinations. There are certainly things in your own characteristics that might bring out the worst in other people, and other people might actually get on with that person fine. So it's really complicated. I certainly don't have an easy answer to it.
I like the way you kind of walked me through that because it's an interesting kind of play. Because I noticed in your book, and I haven't read any others except for this one, but you definitely have a higher level, let's say, of emotional intelligence. The way that you're able to get into the characters of what matters to them, humanity, the religious aspect, the world's coming to an end, people start. Have you always had this sort of EI, or did something get developed like the older you got, as I'd say, or as the wisdom lines started to hit the forehead?
No, I think, I mean, even at school, people, the big word that gets bandied around as a kid is that you're sensitive. And, it's a very loaded word. It sounds like a pejorative at school, and it's coded as well to signal that you might be gay, which I was, but I didn't come out till I was 21. But I think, the sensitivity is coded in that sense. But I think there was a truth underneath it, which is you become hypersensitive to, for whatever reason, to people's reactions. Indifference. I'm amazed at, for example, when I look at American politicians, the amount of abuse they have to put up with, and they seem to let it. I mean, it must affect them on some level, but on another level, it does slide off them. Whether you admire them or not, whether you agree with them or not, they have a kind of ability to shake it off in a way that I don't think I could go through that and just sort of carry on. And so it's interesting. I think some people just seem to have an indifference to other people's opinions or other people's perspectives. And I don't even, again, say that as an insult or as a negative. I think you can be overly sensitive to or overly reactive in daily life. But when it comes to writing, that's everything. Like, I mean, you cannot be
Yeah.
indifferent to characters. I mean, to write well, you have to try and feel everything they're feeling, the good and the bad. And then you have to try and figure out how to put it on the page. And one of the things I always try and do is I never try to bully a character. So I think it's very easy to set up a character as either being unintelligent or uninteresting, and to set someone else, including myself, as the author against them. And I'm
Yeah.
always trying to find what is interesting and what is kind of inspiring about them. And so I think that maybe that comes across as well, which is there's no one that I'm not interested in the book, whether I like them as a person or a non-person in this case, in child in Cold People. But I'm always trying to get close to them in some way.
So you told me there was nothing off limits before this. And coming out as gay, what sort of anxiety did you have up to that moment? I mean, as a young boy or whatever stage you started to know or started to have these feelings, were you having anxiety? Was there depression? What were you going through?
It's a question again, not to say that I haven't answered any questions in my life, but it is one that I'm continually working with. And actually, for the new book I'm working on, I've written an afterword which addresses the connections between coming out and coming out as a writer as being gay. It's almost like I think there was this sense that you come out once, and whatever age, it might be 16, it might be 21, it might be 31, it might be 51, and it's done. And what I realized actually is this continual process. It continually happens. You have to come out first to your parents and your friends, then you have to come out professionally, then you change job and you have to come out again. It's like this constant thing. So in a way, it's like this rolling process. And I realized that it rolls through even in my work. I mean, my first novel was Child 44, and really didn't have any main gay characters. There was an element of the question of justice, and there was some injustice directed at gay characters in the book. But it had a kind of ostensibly had no main gay characters. And I was asked in an interview, why I hadn't addressed any by a gay journalist, why I hadn't covered any gay topics. And I simply pointed out, it has a energy that I think is interesting for queer readers. But I did wonder when he asked that, that's a good question. Like, when will I do that? And in Cold People, there is this central love story, which is actually between a gay guy and a creation. And it's sort of like these two creations that are kind of hated for different reasons, falling in love with each other. So it's constantly inside of me. So when I go back to that question which you're asking, I shouldn't make it sound like it's done and dusted when I was
Yeah.
21. But it was traumatic. School was very awful. I love that I now hear stories of people having great times at school, and that school, for many people, not all people, feels like a much better place. For me, it was awful. When I was walking to school, I was called the F word by everyone who overtook me. And so what happened is I changed route. I found, there was a shorter route to school. I would walk to school. And to avoid these people, I would then take this very circuitous route. I now love walking, and I wonder whether, the fact that I had to do this really long walk.
Kids can be very cruel, as can their parents.
Yeah, I mean, but then, you read stories now of people being kind of really wonderful and parents being wonderful. And I don't know, I felt like other people, it was tough. And I certainly think it's, interwoven into who I am now for sure.
You've reached this stage in life that I'd say you now have success. Do you feel it? Like, was there a moment you're like, Dustin, I knew I had, like, you felt success, or haven't you reached it yet to your own mind?
Success is a strange concept because I think what it enabled me to do on the new book is to take chances. And so that's when you have a level of success, because there's a degree of, you're not surrounded by fear. You're thinking to yourself, let me write something that I feel really passionate about. That is a wonderful feeling. When you're starting out, when I was in my 20s, my parents left school at 16, both of them. They weren't connected to the writing industry. So I didn't have any connections. I thought, is this even possible as a career? And then, so your first thoughts are, how do I survive? And I was kind of scrapping around on lots of different shows, trying to, pay the rent and save up enough money to write a novel. And then you write a novel and you think, oh wow, this could happen. And then you reach a point, and this, to answer your question in a slightly circuitous route, where you think, well, now I've reached this point where I can really think, what do I want to write? which part of my soul do I want to share, and not necessarily worry about it from a kind of purely financial or business perspective.
Self care. How important is it?
Really important. I think there's lots of things I do. I love walking, staying fit, listening to podcasts. There was a famous quote. I think it was Martin Amos, but he might have been quoting someone else. But who said there are two types of people in the world: the people who like the morning and the people who like the night. You can't have both. And I love the morning. I love sunrise. I love getting up to write. I love a cup of tea.
How do you start your day?
So I get up early. I love watching sunrise, which I can do here, and I make a cup of tea and I write. So my best writing time is from 6 a.m. to midday. That's my main slot.
Every day.
When I'm writing something, it is pretty much every day because it's kind of inefficient, and I don't like. Um, I like that feeling of constantly going over it. So if you take a weekend off or those 2 days off, it can kind of drift a bit, and you kind of think, well, you've got to restart it. So actually, the Monday would become a lot of recapping. Like, what was I writing? What was I thinking? Like, it's just much easier actually to write continuously until something is finished, which is much easier for a script than it is for a novel.
You talk about the elements of friendship quite a bit. You use the word love and handsome. How do you define a friend? Like, is it different today than it was as you look back?
Wow, a friend, I think it's a big question, but when there is a problem, I mean, in a weird way, the best way to define it is you think when there's a crisis, who are we going to call? And there's that sense that if one of those people is on the list, they're a friend, and they can be as disparate, as disconnected, they can be as different as. But if you think I trust this person, I want to hear their opinion, I'm in a bind, I need their help. That's a friend, and I think that encompasses a great many. I think my friends are very varied in that sense, and kind of spread around the world, which is a nice feeling as well. But I don't think I have a less generalized definition. I don't think I have. mm, there are obvious things like I think your friends. And it was interesting because I listened to podcasts. I love podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So just a lot of people just talking about their life. And I was listening today, and they said they were in a crisis, and they really saw who their friends were. And one of his things that I won't say it was because it's a big story, but he was saying that one of the things was he could tell the people who were pleased that things were going badly for him. And he was like, well, they were never really my friends. And I do think that is a real definition of friends, that they feel excited for your successes and they feel pain by your difficulties. And that isn't true for everyone.
Does anything keep you up at night anymore?
I've been sleeping pretty well recently. I had anxiety does. I can always fall asleep, but I wake up. That's my thing. So I will fall asleep and then I'll wake up 2 hours in and I'll be wide awake because I'll have some thought, some worry. When we were doing the last TV show, which we were filming in Atlanta, I was waking up every night at 2 in the morning and then at 4 in the morning. And that isn't a nice feeling. But I've never had that insomnia that I've heard other people talk about where they just cannot go to sleep and they just lie in bed full of worry. I've always been able to sleep. It's just a question of whether my dreams become traumatic and wake me up.
So you clearly have a high performance mind. Like, what are the tools and ways you're like, how do you get yourself to hyper focus? Because there's a lot of distractions in this world. I know a lot of my listeners, there's so many things pulling at them. So how do you like tone it all in? I have an ADHD brain myself. How do you focus in on that one thing to complete it and get it done?
Building a routine is one of the things that I think is a key. And this thing of starting at 6 is not just because I like the sunrise. There is this sense that the world is completely quiet, and like it's just you and your thoughts and the writing. And then even by like 9 and 10, you can feel the world waking up and there's more interactions. Um, and the reverse of that is some people love the quietness of the midnight to 3 a.m. writing, which has never been my thing. But it's the same idea, which is you just pull the world out, the world goes to sleep, and you're just going to focus. And that is also a kind of state of mind. When I put on a podcast, I always try and find one that is the right time of the walk. So I'm not kind of constantly looking at my phone, checking it. I'll put it on, I'll listen to the whole thing. There are things like that, those little tricks. which are just useful. I'm not a particular fan of things that are 15 seconds or 20 seconds long. When I look at YouTube videos or podcasts, I'm always looking for that 20, 30, 40-minute length. I like it. I like the concentration. It doesn't seem difficult to me. I actually probably find the reverse. I find, too many bits and pieces. I don't necessarily know what the appeal of that is. Someone was, talking to me about TikTok, and I don't want to sound like I'm really old and I don't get it. But the 15-second thing, I was just like, what can you get at 15 seconds? I don't get it. Like, I literally couldn't figure it out.
But that's the attention span of most people. It's like 15 seconds, that clickbait to get them.
It's fascinating though, because when you look at, anything like a podcast or YouTube or even a TV show, when you look at the length, how much time they have to develop something. And if you're looking at an episode that's 50 minutes long, you're like, oh, they've got a lot of time to really go deep into something. And even something that's 22 minutes, which is that kind of comedy, 30-minute, sketch, you think, well, that's much less time. And so to take it down to a couple of minutes, I think it's just growing up without smartphones. So when I was at university, I was on still those Nokia. Just text messaging was a revelation to me.
There weren't all those distractions or options. I was interviewing an author yesterday in the children's world. His name is Stuart Gibbs. And he had said that a number of parents have approached him and said, my kid didn't like to read until he read your book. Why is it that most people now aren't reading like they once did or like their parents did? Why, as a society? Because reading is fun. I just finished a 600-page book yesterday. I'm like, oh, I wish it could continue because you get to go to this world and you you get to see these words come alive.
I think books are wonderful, but I think what is interesting about trying to get people who maybe haven't had a background in reading to read is one of the worst things you can say is how great books are, because it makes them feel like they're it's almost like you're trying to kind of force a vegetable on someone they don't really like to eat. And so it's really like, I think one of the things is to almost make it sound quite practical, which is I always tell people to never start a book at bedtime, because I'm like, you're tired, you've had a really long day, you're going to fall asleep at page one, and then you'll think you hate the book when in fact you're just tired. You should always start it during the day. And then, once you're into the book, you can read it at night, because then you're kind of into it. And there are weird tricks like that, which you get to know yourself because you get to know your rhythms. But to people who don't read as much, I think they're quite intimidating. Like, I mean, when I wrote Child 44, I knew I had to read all this Russian history. And I went into a bookstore in Piccadilly and just bought all the Russian history books that seemed good to me, took them home and read them. And I don't think if I hadn't gone to university and kind of been taught that skill, I would have been intimidated by it. Whereas to me, I was just like, well, here they are, let's read them. If I don't know something, you just read it. And so I didn't have that intimidation that I think, that some people can feel. But I agree with you that, I mean, it's a really wonderful feeling when you're in a book and you're lost in it in a way that I don't think is equivalent in any other medium. And you don't want it to finish. And you feel close to the person who's speaking in a way, or who's writing in a way that is really special, actually.
That was the way it was when I read Cold People. I didn't want it to end. I wanted it to continue, but I love the way you did the send off. Tom, I have to thank you so much for giving us your time today in the mind of one of the world's best authors, and I've read literally 1,000+ books in my life. You are an exceptional human being. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. That was very kind of my pleasure talking to you.